if I tell you about repentance, people, the Rambam says there's different steps to repentance. There is recognize that you sin, getting bad about sinning, and changing. 3 steps to repentance. So if you ask people what really is the hardest thing to do in repentance, I think most people say it's changing. If I say, what's the easiest thing you have to do of these things, what would you say?
You say you're sorry.
What?
You say you're sorry.
Say you're sorry, that's true. But I think that the easiest, what? Is you recognize it. I mean, most people walk around saying, yeah, I did that wrong. And almost like right after you did it, you sort of, you did something wrong. The 2 examples that we have of people who are our models of Teshuva are both individuals who at first did not recognize that they sinned. Yehuda doesn't recognize that he sinned. He basically, he's ready to execute Tamar. He thinks he did everything right by not arranging for the other son to live with Tamar. And in the end, that's what he learns. He said, gee, I was wrong. I had a whole perception that I was right, I'm wrong. David over here, before nothing comes, there's nothing that he has he did anything wrong. Because he worked at the technicalities, exactly that. She wasn't married. It was not lust. It was a love situation. She was my b'sheret. She wasn't married. That Uriah Hitig was a scoundrel anyways, and it was absolutely right to execute him. Nothing wrong, and look what we have. We now live together, and we it's a nice happy ending, right? I got rid of the bad guy. I get my princess, and it's really beautiful. Nothing has to come and say, something. And it's interesting. Nothing doesn't come and say you did something wrong. He gives over this parable to him, and gets across something with this parable that says you didn't look at the whole case. Really what happens is I think what he's saying over here is you saw it from your side, but you didn't see the whole side. Maybe Uri, wanted to stay with BatSheva. Maybe there was a relationship there. Now you worked it out through technicalities, but you didn't see the whole perspective. Maybe you should have waited a little while. At that point in time, he basically says, I can work things out technically, but there's a broader perspective that I have to be considerate of. Okay? There's a certain way of doing things. And this is a tremendous lesson for us. I think it's a very, very important concept over here. And I think that's why the story is written the way it is. Because the story is, there's a lot of midrashim about these stories and so forth and so forth, and it seems that the rabbis changed around the whole story over here. But the story is basically to get across the point that, yeah, technically, David acted totally within the law. But there's something over here that you could, just by reading the story, you sort of have a feel that there's something's wrong. And that's what David understood. He understood technically, and he understood that since he was technically within the law, and since there were proper motivations, obviously there was a reason he wanted to be with BatSheva, and there was a positive reason for being with BatSheva, and there was an aspect that they wanted to have children, and so forth and so forth. In the end, there was something positive of him remaining with BatSheva. There was something about his goal that had positive aspects to it. But the truth is he went about it whether technically correct. There's something in the story that says you went about it without real issue of seeing what's happening. It just doesn't look right.
This issue of Uri Hitti being treasonous and all that, is that something they're saying maybe he was, or is there really any indication of that in the text?
There are indications. There's some allusion to it in the text, but the fact is it seems in the measures that there was much stronger reasons for it. It wasn't just a trumped-up charge.
So there is in the text.
Yeah, although some allusions to it in the text. Okay, David says to Uri, go do this, and he says, nah, I don't feel like it. Which was basically in those days, just say no to a king.
Wonder if he knew he slept with his wife.
No, there's no way he knew.
Okay.
No. No, that doesn't come out.
Okay.
It's pretty. It was pretty secretive and so forth. But it's very interesting because BatSheva obviously acquiesced and told this and so forth. But the thing that I really find fascinating about this is the fact that there's a meta halacha that sometimes is overlooked. Sometimes we can work things out technically in Jewish law, and we don't see the meta halacha, that there's an aspect of the way you carry yourself, the way you come across, and really it's an aspect where we have many statements. Like, for example, we have statements in Pirkei Avos, these Peres lo min ha'adam, you're supposed to act in a way that's also positive in the eyes of other people. A yasher b'nei adam should do what's straight in the eyes of man. There's aspects about within Judaism that the halacha just basically, lays down certain parameters for our behavior. But sometimes, if you only deal with the technical parameters of the behavior, you don't see the broader concepts, which necessitates people also being aware of how other people look at things. Within Jewish thought, the natural morality of people is not something that's totally discounted. It's something that you have to be somewhat aware of. Sometimes it's going to be contrary to Torah values, and therefore you can't acquiesce to it. Like the present positive view of same-sex relationships. The point is that you obviously cannot say from a Torah perspective that that's okay. On the other hand, the fundamentalist perspective, which is totally attacked by the world, which basically, you have this guy who's a fundamentalist preacher who basically says string him up and kill them or so. That also can't be tolerated. The fact is that you have to sort of be aware of the feelings of people, and they have value and a certain sense of morality. The thing is it's very interesting. This wedding just happened between Chelsea Clinton and Mark Gronzewski, I think his name is, and it raises real issues in terms of an intermarriage and so forth and so forth. It's a lot of discussion about this in the Jewish press and so forth, but it's not something you can come out and say, listen, it's an intermarriage, it's just terrible. For these two individuals, they obviously feel an attraction to each other. You can't just discount it. You say there's something obviously from a Jewish perspective, halakhic perspective, you're not happy with it, but you have to be aware that there's some values going on over there. There's some perception over there, and it just tells you that the world is much more complicated than people like it to if they only have black and white perspectives. And one of the things with David and Melech is, I think from the story of David and Melech, is that on the surface, technically, they worked it out that it's okay, and that's why he's able to stay with BatSheva. But the truth is, in terms of the real world, it's much more complex, and that's really where we have to work at, and that may be a greater challenge in terms of Teshuva. That sometimes working out what exactly is the problem is not so easy. It's very simple to say black and white. It's a lot more difficult when you deal with all the aspects of life and try to come up with having to deal with it. And sometimes that makes you go to a higher standard. Yeah.
Do you think there's any connection between the David and BatSheva story and then the fracturing of Shlomo HaMelech's, the Malchut under Shlomo HaMelech's sons, Yeravam and Rechavam? Was it visited on Shalashim and Rebbeim? There
is some perceptions of that in the commentaries. That there's some continuation of the outcome of David BatSheva. I mean, the fact is that that's why even Shlomo Melech is held somewhat accountable for what happened with Rechavam and so forth. But I think I did see something where it is fractured. In fact, it seems to say over here, if I remember correctly, that it says something about that there will be consequences to this into the future. I think it actually says that somewhere. I mean, the first child dies, the second child is going to become king. That was Shlomo Melech. But I think I did see something about the fact that it will be it will be there will be consequences. It's a very fascinating. I mean, you see this from both sides. I mean, look at this, like in terms of David Melch, right? Here's this situation, right? He sort of has this affair with BatSheva and so forth, and then he's this great king, and he's told that his first son will die, and obviously the son with David and BatSheva, and and then he goes in and he says, "V'yinachet David et BatSheva ishto," and David goes in to try and try to comfort his wife BatSheva, right? And then he says, and then he sleeps with her, right? And she has a son Shlomo. It's like there is a romantic side to this, a real tender relationship. They lose the first child. David's being punished, but Sheva obviously is being punished, and yet this man who says Chatasi still goes in and says, well, this relationship still has value, and I'm going to I'm going to comfort you, and we're going to have another child. So it's obviously, what I find is that in so many ways, determining what to do, there's a lot of gray in it. A lot of things people are so black and white about things. In the movie world, you're always cracking jokes about movie stars and so forth. And I point out to people the relationship between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, which was considered to be a very established relationship, a very loving relationship, and so forth and so forth. Right? The fact is that Joanne Woodward was Paul Newman's second wife, and basically it was an adulterous relationship in the beginning. So that's not to justify it. You know what I mean? It's like we live in a world today that's almost like, again, much more complicated. Almost just like, well, they were in love, therefore the adultery is okay. It's not okay. David said Chatasi l'Shem. It was not okay. On the other hand, it still had that side to it, that there was this love relationship, and it was the relationship that brings forth the Mashiach. It's really an example of the complexity. I think the complexity of the period that we're going into with Elul and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. People ask, why is it that you keep saying Chatasi over the next 40 days or whatever? It's like you keep repenting. You keep on Yom Kippur. How many times do you do the Viduim and so forth, and before that, and all the things, the Gimel Midot and so forth, and it's like, just, hey, I made a mistake, God, please forgive me. Should it happen? I'm sorry. Okay. The fact is you spend all this time, and I make a distinction that I say the truth is that there's concepts of doing tshuva every day, right? We say Tachlin every day. There's prayers to do tshuva in our Shmona Esrei. We say Slach Lanu, we forgive us, and so on and so forth. There's certain tshuvas which are a little bit easier. I ate the Big Mac. I shouldn't have eaten the Big Mac. Please forgive me. I won't eat a Big Mac again. Right? I don't do that personally, but the fact is that there's things like we said before, and there's certain averas which are pretty straightforward, black and white. We know that. There's other averas which, and the classic examples are Yehuda and David, where it's much more complex. It's not so even easy even to see what you did wrong. You're not sure. You think you're a tzaddik. In fact, in the story with Yehuda, he was ready to execute Tamar. He actually think he did a mitzvah, right? Like I said, the hardest tshuva is to do tshuva on a sin. That's one thing, but to do tshuva that which you thought was a mitzvah was really a sin, that's much more difficult. And if you look at a lot of cases in Jewish thought, that's really the challenge, is the people really think, I'm doing the right thing, and they have to figure out, no, I'm not doing the right thing. And that's much more complex, because when you get into those situations, it's not so black and white. And the fact is, there's a statement by the Maharal of Prague that there's no there's nothing that's tamei that doesn't have a little bit of tahara. There's nothing that's impure that doesn't have a little purity in it. There's nothing that's impure that doesn't have a little impurity in it. And then he goes and he says, there's nothing that's forbidden that doesn't have some reason for it to be permitted, and there's nothing that's permitted that doesn't have some reason to be forbidden. People like living in black and white. They like black and white. The reality is the world's not black and white. The fact is that even when you do a mitzvah, there could be negative repercussions. I point out the story of Purim. Right? What Esther did was remarkable. She destroyed her own life in that, right? I mean, you think about that. She went in. It's a whole issue about that, but she went into Achashverosh, and Mordechai says, "Go into Achashverosh and save the Jewish people." So she's going in to save Achashverosh. When she went into Achashverosh, she was the queen. It was like 30 days she didn't see Achashverosh. I'm telling you, she went into Achashverosh. It was not to have tea. You know what I mean? Like she was the guy's wife, and she came to visit the Achashverosh. She knew what it meant. You know, she was going to initiate physical contact with Achashverosh and basically have relations with this non-Jew. So, but on the other hand, she had to save the Jewish people. So the fact is, nothing is absolutely black and white, and that's something that makes it much more complex in determining what is the right thing to do. And, you know, it doesn't justify doing the wrong thing. I think that's one of the important things that happened with David. He had all these arguments over, wait a second, you still have to take the consequences for the negative, and you have to figure out if there was a better way to do this. And there's still negative consequences. This is not a way of saying that it's gray, therefore there's a positive side. There's going to be some benefit in doing this. What it means, though, in terms of being gray, is you have to see the complexity, and you have to try and understand how challenging it is to make the right decision. And it's not so simple. And in the end, I think that's what the story of David is about. There's something about it that has a positive aspect to it. There's obviously something about it that has a negative aspect to it. Technically, he was fine. It wasn't a technical sin, but he himself says, "Chatasi l'Hashem." There might have been a better way. There obviously was a better way for me to do this, and I understood that this is the way of doing it. But complex. Life is complex, and that's how you have to make decisions.